Every time they made progress and hope seemed within reach, someone from the old regime would try to tear it down. "We need to stop this before it gains any more momentum," Marcus said, his voice firm and resolute. "If Vico's rallying loyalists, we need to shut him down, publicly. We can't let them win." Nico nodded, but his expression remained cautious. "And what about Leah?" Marcus's chest tightened at the mention of her name. Leah had been distant, but she was still the leader of the resistance, the face of the movement that had toppled Nero. She needed to be involved in this, but Marcus wasn't sure if she was ready to face another confrontation so soon. "I'll talk to her," Marcus said, his voice heavy with concern. "But we need to be careful. Leah's been through enough, and we don't want to add to her burden." Nico gave a curt nod, then turned to leave. "We don't have much time. Vico's meeting is happening soon. If we're going to act, it has to be now." Marcus found Leah in the courtyard of the safe house, overseeing a group of workers as they unloaded supplies from a truck. She moved with purpose, her brow furrowed in concentration as she directed the workers, focusing entirely on the task. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to burden her with more bad news, not when she already carried so much. But he knew that they couldn't afford to wait. Vico's loyalists were a ticking time bomb, and if they didn't act soon, the fragile peace they had built would crumble. "Leah," Marcus called out, his voice soft but urgent. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable as she met his gaze. "What is it?" "We need to talk," Marcus said, stepping closer. Leah frowned, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm in the middle of something, Marcus. Can it wait?" "No," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "It can't." Leah sighed, clearly frustrated, but she waved for one of the workers to take over before turning to face Marcus fully. "What's going on?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice low. "Nico just told me that Vico is organizing a meeting with Nero's loyalists in the southern district. They're planning something big." Leah's expression darkened, her jaw tightening as she processed the information. "Vico," she muttered, her voice filled with disdain. "I should have known he'd try something." Marcus nodded. "We need to act fast. If he rallies enough people, he could destabilize the entire city. We can't let that happen." Leah crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as she considered their options. "We'll need to gather as much intel as we can. If Vico's planning a coup, we need to know how many people he's got on his side and make sure the rest of the city doesn't panic." Marcus agreed, but there was a hesitation in his voice when he spoke. "Leah, I know you've been pushing yourself hard lately, and I don't want to." "Don't," Leah interrupted, her voice sharp. "Don't treat me like I'm fragile, Marcus. I know what's at stake here." Marcus swallowed hard, feeling a pang of guilt. He hadn't meant to insult her, but he also couldn't ignore the toll that recent events had taken on her. Leah was strong, but even the strongest people had their limits. "I'm not trying to treat you like you're fragile," Marcus said softly. "I just don't want you to burn out." Leah's gaze softened slightly, but her voice was still stern when she spoke. "We don't have time to worry about that. The city needs us." Marcus nodded, though his concern for her remained. "I know. But I don't want to lose you in the process." For a moment, there was a flicker of something in Leah's eyes, something vulnerable that Marcus hadn't seen in her for a long time. But it disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the steely resolve that had carried her through so many battles. "We won't have a city to rebuild if Vico succeeds," Leah said firmly. "We need to stop him. Now." Later that night, Marcus and Leah gathered with Nico and a small group of resistance members in an abandoned warehouse on the city's outskirts. The air was tense as they reviewed the intelligence gathered on Vico's movements. It wasn't much, whispers and rumors, but it was enough to confirm that Vico was rallying many loyalists, many armed and ready to fight. "We need to hit them hard and fast," Nico said, his voice low. "If we can catch them off guard, we might be able to shut this down before it gets out of hand." Leah nodded, her expression grim. "Agreed. But we need to be careful. If we come in guns blazing, we risk turning this into a full-scale war." Marcus leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What about the people in the southern district? We can't let them get caught in the crossfire. Leah's gaze flickered to Marcus, and for a moment, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of the decisions they were about to make. But she didn't hesitate. We'll evacuate the civilians first, Leah said, her voice steady. Once they're out of harm's way, we'll move in on Vico. Nico nodded, but there was a hesitation in his voice when he spoke. What if Vico doesn't back down? What if he's prepared for us? Lee's jaw tightened, her eyes hardening with determination. Then we'll do whatever it takes to stop him. We can't afford to let this city fall back into the hands of Nero's loyalists. The plan was set. Next chapter. Chapter 15. The days following the thwarted meeting in the Southern District were tense but strangely quiet. The threat of Vico's uprising had been neutralized, at least for now, but the sense of unease that had settled over Rome hadn't lifted. Marcus could feel it in the air, like the pressure building before a storm, and no matter how hard he tried to shake it, he couldn't. The city was a maze of shadows and whispers, remnants of Nero's regime still lurking in the dark corners, waiting for their chance to strike. The people were rebuilding, but there was a fragility to it, a tentative hope that could easily shatter under the weight of one wrong move. And Marcus knew that move could come from anywhere. As he navigated the narrow streets, burdened with the weight of leadership, Marcus couldn't help but reminisce about the life he had left behind. He had spent years shaping the narrative, using his influence to mold the world, but now, in the aftermath of Nero's fall, everything felt uncertain. His role in the city's rebirth was still evolving, and every decision felt like it could either solidify or shatter the fragile peace they had fought so hard to achieve. The old Marcus would have thrived in this uncertainty. He had always been good at playing the game, at staying one step ahead of his enemies. But now, with everything he had learned, everything Leah had taught him, he wasn't sure if he wanted to play that game anymore. But just because he didn't want to play didn't mean others weren't willing to. As he approached the safe house, Marcus spotted Nico waiting at the entrance, his expression grim. After Peter's death, Nico had become a trusted ally, but Marcus knew that the man still harbored doubts about him. It wasn't something Marcus could fault for, he had doubts about himself, too. Something's happened, Nico said without preamble as Marcus reached the door. Marcus frowned, his chest tightening with concern. What is it? Nico's gaze flickered toward the horizon as if searching for the right words. Someone from your past. He's here. Marcus's heart skipped a beat, a cold dread settling in his stomach. His past was full of people who could complicate things, and none of them would be welcome in the new world he and Leah were trying to build. Who? Nico hesitated for a moment before speaking. Luca. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face at the name Luca Ferraro, Nero's nephew. The man had been a shadowy presence during Nero's reign, operating in the background and handling the more unsavory aspects of Nero's rule. While Marcus had never worked directly with him, their paths had crossed more than once, and Luca had always been a figure that made Marcus uneasy. If Luca was in Rome, it could only mean one thing: Nero's loyalists were gearing up for something bigger, something more dangerous than they had faced before. Where is he? Marcus asked, his voice tight. He's been spotted in the Eastern District, Nico replied. He's keeping a low profile for now, but he's trying to rally some of Nero's old contacts. Marcus cursed under his breath. Luca was dangerous, perhaps more so than Nero had ever been. Where Nero had been blunt and forceful, Luca was subtle and manipulative. He knew how to pull the strings from the shadows, and if he was trying to gather support, it meant the loyalists were far from defeated. We need to act swiftly, Marcus declared, his mind already formulating plans. If Luca's here, we can't afford to let him gain any ground. Nico nodded in agreement, but there was something hesitant in his expression. And what about Leah? Marcus froze, his chest tightening at the mention of her name. Leah had been distant since Vico's meeting, focusing entirely on rebuilding the city and keeping the peace. They hadn't spoken much, and Marcus knew her trust in him was fragile. Bringing Luca into the mix would complicate things even further, especially since Marcus had a history with the Ferraro family that Leah didn't fully know about. I'll tell her, Marcus said, though the words felt heavy. He wasn't sure how Leah would react to the news or if she would even believe he was still committed to their shared vision of Rome's future. But he couldn't keep this from her. Not now. When Marcus found her, Leah was in the courtyard, overseeing a group of workers clearing rubble from a collapsed building. She moved with a sense of purpose, her focus unwavering, but Marcus could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of everything they had been through still pressing down on her. "Leah," Marcus called out as he approached. She turned, her brow furrowing slightly at the sight of him. "What is it?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice careful. "We need to talk. It's important." Leah glanced at the workers, then nodded, gesturing for Marcus to follow her into the nearby alley where they could speak privately. Once they were alone, she crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "What's going on?" Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing as he tried to find the right words. "Luca Ferraro is in Rome." Leah's eyes widened, her jaw tightening as she processed the information. "Luca? Nero's nephew?" Marcus nodded. "He's been spotted in the Eastern District. Nico thinks he's trying to rally some of Nero's old contacts, possibly preparing for a larger move." Leah's expression darkened, her eyes narrowing. "And you're just telling me this now?" Marcus cringed at the sharpness in her voice, guilt gnawing at him. "I just found out myself. I wanted to tell you as soon as I knew." Leah stared at him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. Marcus could feel the tension between them, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. She didn't say it, but he knew what she was thinking. She was wondering if this was all part of some larger scheme, if Marcus's past was catching up to him in ways that could destroy everything they had worked for.